The screams cut through the night like a blade slicing open the dark, sharp and trembling and full of raw terror. And Ethan Cross froze where he stood because no creature on this planet should have been able to sound that human. Yet no human patrol was anywhere near this cursed jungle, the one place every soldier was warned never to wander alone. But warning or not, something deep inside him tightened, something old and human and stubborn that refused to ignore another living being in pain. So he stepped forward slowly as if the darkness itself were watching him. The alien forest glowed faintly under its bioluminescent sky, blue leaves shimmering like cold fire, and each step Ethan took sent soft pulses through the ground as if the land were breathing beneath his boots. He held his rifle close, eyes sweeping left and right, listening to the distant hum of unseen insects and the soft groans of trees, bending under their own strange light. But the screams came again, louder this time, filled with a fear that pushed his heart to beat faster. And without another thought he followed the sound into the deeper shadows. Protocol said never to leave the designated human zone. Protocol said this planet's tribal aliens were unpredictable and violent. Protocol said breaking the rules could start an interplanetary conflict that would stain his uniform with the weight of 1,000 consequences. But Protocol didn't hear that scream. Protocol didn't feel the twisting pain in his chest. Protocol didn't understand the way his hands shook slightly because no soldier trained for war could walk away from someone burning alive. The air thickened with smoke the farther he went, carrying the scent of wood and something sharper, something metallic, something that felt like blood mixed with the heat of a rising fire. He crouched behind a cluster of glowing ferns, raising his rifle as the trees opened into a clearing lit by orange flames that danced violently in the wind. Ethan's breath caught as he saw them, a ring of towering tribal aliens covered in bone armor carved from creatures long extinct, their bodies painted with red ash, their movements wild and ritualistic as they chanted around a burning stake. And tied to that stake was a girl unlike anything Ethan had ever seen, her skin pale like liquid silver, her hair flowing like strands of moonlight even in the fire's heat, her wrists bound with twisted vines that pulsed as if alive, her face twisted in agony as flames licked dangerously close to her feet. While the tribe danced with savage joy, another scream tore from her throat, and Ethan flinched because it wasn't just pain. It was a plea, a desperate cry for help from someone who believed no help was coming. He felt anger rise inside him fast and hot. Anger at the cruelty, anger at the ritual, anger at himself for still standing hidden instead of moving. But he forced himself to breathe slowly because rushing blindly into a hostile camp would only get both of them killed. He scanned the area, counting targets, evaluating weapons, studying escape routes, the old human soldier instincts rising through him like a second heartbeat. But even as his mind worked, something else stirred, something emotional and unbearably human. The understanding that the girl on the stake was alive now but wouldn't be for long if he delayed. His fingers tightened on his rifle, and he whispered to himself that this was madness, pure madness. But the next scream cut through any hesitation he had left, and Ethan stepped out from the shadows, moving with silent determination toward the heart of danger, each step echoing in the pit of his stomach as the tribe turned slowly toward him, dozens of glowing yellow eyes widening with surprise and fury at the sight of a human soldier, boldly entering their sacred ritual ground. The fire crackled loudly, sparks rising into the night like desperate souls trying to escape, and Ethan's boots crunched against the glowing moss as he stood tall, rifle raised, muscles tense and ready. But inside he could hear his heartbeat pounding like a drum calling him toward a fate he hadn't chosen yet. He shouted for them to stop, his voice strong but shaken, and for a moment the world went eerily silent, the air freezing as if the forest itself held its breath. The tribal chief, a massive creature with tusks carved into symbols of power, snarled and stepped forward, pounding his chest with a thundering roar, and the other warriors responded with chilling cries that sent vibrations rolling through the ground. Ethan swallowed hard but didn't step back, his stance firm, his eyes fixed not on the chief but on the girl, whose trembling eyes met his for the smallest moment, shining with confusion and hope and terror all at once. That look shattered him, because in that single second he understood that she wasn't just a victim. She was alone, hunted, dying, and he was the only one who had come for her, the only one who had listened to her screams, the only one who had chosen humanity over rules. Ethan exhaled slowly, a breath filled with fear and courage tangled together, and he tightened his grip on the rifle, whispering under his breath that he was sorry for what was about to happen, but he would not let her burn, not tonight, not while he still had strength in his hands. and as flames stretched higher and the tribe closed in around him, Ethan stepped forward into the firelit circle, ready to rewrite the destiny of two worlds with a single impossible act of bravery. The moment Ethan stepped into the firelit circle, time stretched thin like a trembling wire ready to snap. The tribal warriors froze for a heartbeat, shocked that a lone human dared interrupt their sacred ritual. Then a violent roar erupted from the chief, shaking the clearing as warriors tightened their grips on bone-forged spears glowing with eerie red energy. Ethan felt heat brush his face as sparks from the burning stake rose into the night, like frantic fireflies escaping a nightmare. But he kept moving forward with desperate courage pulling him step by step, because the silver-skinned girl tied to the wood was slipping closer to death. With every second he wasted, he raised his rifle and fired a warning shot into the air, the sharp crack echoing through the forest like thunder splitting the sky. It startled the nearest warriors, making them stumble back, but instead of fear, fury darkened their glowing eyes. The chief pointed toward Ethan and shouted something guttural, a command filled with hate and ancient authority, and the circle exploded into chaos as a flood of warriors charged at him. Ethan didn't have time to think. He fired short controlled bursts, hitting the ground near their feet to slow them down without killing them, because killing any of them could ignite a war between humans and the tribal clans, a war that would stain generations. But these warriors were fast, faster than he expected, their movements wild and unpredictable, their bodies twisting like beasts born for battle. One spear sliced through the air and grazed his shoulder, burning hot as if alive. Ethan gritted his teeth, rolled to the ground, and pulled himself up again. He felt the weight of a dozen threats pressing in, yet his focus never drifted from the girl, her body shaking, her breath shallow, her glowing eyes fluttering open and closed like a fading star fighting to stay alive. He could feel her pain from where he stood, and something in him tightened with a fierce determination. He slammed the butt of his rifle into a warrior who lunged at him, dodged another spear, and pushed through the circle with raw human stubbornness, a stubbornness older than every alien law in the galaxy. When he finally reached the stake, the heat was intense, licking against his skin, sparks clinging to his uniform, and the girl flinched when his shadow fell over her, her voice barely a whisper as she tried to speak in a language he couldn't understand. Yet somehow he felt the meaning, a plea mixed with confusion, a question asking why he had come. Ethan didn't answer. He didn't need to. He pulled out his combat knife and slashed the burning ropes, the vines hissing as if alive and angry. And when the last knot fell, the girl collapsed forward into his arms, her body shockingly light, trembling fiercely as if each breath hurt her chest. Ethan felt her cold hands gripping weakly at his vest, and that simple touch pushed him into motion. The tribe saw what he had done, their howls rising like a storm crashing against the clearing. The chief roared so loudly the flames shook, and warriors surged toward them with renewed fury. Ethan didn't wait. He lifted the alien girl into his arms, her silvery hair brushing his cheek, her faint glow lighting the space between them like fragile moonlight. And he ran into the forest as the ground quaked with the force of the chasing tribe. Branches slapped against his face as he pushed through the dense jungle, the girl's breath shallow against his chest, each inhale sounding like a broken whisper fighting to survive. Ethan whispered to her that she would be okay, even though he wasn't sure, even though fear clawed at his ribs with every pounding footstep behind him. He didn't stop. He couldn't stop. The forest came alive with movement, beasts scattering, leaves vibrating under the tribal war cries that echoed behind him. Ethan found a narrow passage between two giant roots and slid inside, crouching low as he held the girl protectively, their breaths mingling in the dark space glowing faintly from the blue moss around them. The tribal warriors thundered past without seeing the hidden gap, their heavy steps shaking the ground, their voices spreading out in all directions as they searched for their escaped sacrifice. For a few precious seconds, silence wrapped around Ethan like a fragile shield. He shifted the girl's weight gently, studying her face in the faint glow, the silver tone of her skin shimmering softly like reflected starlight, her eyelids fluttering as if she was slipping in and out of consciousness, her lips forming a word he didn't know. But the fear behind it broke him a little inside. Ethan brushed soot from her cheek with careful fingers, whispering that she was safe now, that he wouldn't let anything happen to her. And her eyes opened just enough for him to see the deep violet glow inside them, a glow filled with pain and disbelief, but also trust she didn't fully understand. Outside, warriors continued their search, their snarling voices cutting through the forest with a promise of violence. Ethan listened closely, waiting for the right moment to move, his muscles tense, his arms still wrapped around the fragile alien girl as if she were the last light in a dying world. When the footsteps faded slightly, he crawled out of the narrow space and moved deeper into the forest, keeping close to the shadows, each step slow and careful, every sound amplified in his ears. He could feel the girl's heartbeat trembling against his chest like a fragile creature, trying to survive the cold. He whispered that he needed her to hold on, just a little more, because a human outpost wasn't far, because he had to get her somewhere safe before the tribe closed in again, because he somehow knew she was more than just a victim, more than just a girl tied to a burning stake. And as the two moons rose above the glowing trees, Ethan carried her through the darkness, unaware that saving her would change not just his life, but the fate of two entire worlds, forever. Ethan pushed through the glowing underbrush with the alien girl held close to his chest, every breath she exhaled trembling against him like a fading spark trying to stay alive. The jungle around them hummed with strange life, blue leaves rippling with soft light as if whispering warnings through the air, and each step Ethan took felt heavier than the last, not because of her weight, but because he could feel time slipping through his fingers. She was losing strength far too quickly. The abandoned outpost came into view like a ghost rising out of the earth, half swallowed by vines and glowing moss, its metal walls rusted and scarred from years of storms and tribal raids. Ethan kicked open the door with his shoulder, careful not to jostle the girl, and stepped inside where darkness and dust waited like silent watchers. The smell of old machinery mixed with the faint scent of burned rope still lingering on her skin. He gently laid her down on a long-abandoned medical cot, the thin mattress sinking beneath her weight, her glowing silver skin dulled by exhaustion and soot. Ethan knelt beside her, pulling out his emergency med kit with shaking hands. The sight of her wounds made his chest tighten painfully, long red burns from where the flames had touched her ankles and wrists, bruises forming where the vines had bitten into her skin like living chains. He cleaned her burns with careful movements, the antiseptic hissing quietly as it touched her wounds. She flinched, a soft gasp escaping her lips, and Ethan murmured that he was sorry, trying to keep his voice steady even though his heart shook with every pain sound she made. Her eyes fluttered open for a moment, revealing those deep violet irises filled with confusion and something more, something like hope mixed with disbelief. "Liara," she whispered weakly, her voice soft like drifting smoke, and Ethan froze because the word carried weight, like a name whispered across galaxies. He repeated it gently, and she nodded faintly as if confirming her identity before her eyes slipped closed again. He had to keep her conscious, he had to keep her awake, so he tapped her cheek lightly and told her to stay with him, his voice trembling with urgency. She tried to sit up, but her body trembled like fragile crystal under too much pressure. Ethan steadied her with one hand on her back, and she looked around the dim outpost with terrified eyes. She spoke a few words in her language, each one sharp with fear, and even though Ethan didn't understand the language, he understood the emotion. She was afraid the tribe was coming, afraid she would be taken again, afraid everything was already lost. He shook his head and told her that no one would touch her again, not while he was here. His voice calm but fierce because it came from the center of his soul, and something in her expression softened as she looked at him, as if she could sense the truth in his heartbeat. Ethan wrapped a thermal blanket around her shoulders and worked quickly to activate the outpost's backup generator, sparks flying as ancient wires struggled to wake from years of silence. Finally the dim lights flickered on, casting soft illumination across her face, and in that moment Ethan saw her clearly for the first time. Not just a girl he had rescued, but a being of haunting beauty, silver skin shimmering like moonlit metal, hair flowing softly like glowing silk, and eyes that looked older than her fragile body suggested. "Princess," she whispered suddenly, touching her chest weakly, and Ethan blinked in shock. She repeated it slower this time, pointing at herself and then forming a shaky symbol with her hand, a symbol he recognized from old human archives, a symbol of the Aelorian Empire, a race thought extinct long before humanity reached the stars. Ethan's breath caught because he realized what she truly was, not just a victim, not just a stranger, but the heir of a lost empire, someone whose existence could change galactic history, someone whose bloodline carried secrets long buried under ancient wars and forgotten treaties. The weight of that truth settled heavily in the room, mixing with the quiet hum of old machinery and the distant echo of tribal shouts. Still searching the jungle, Liara watched his expression, her violet eyes shimmering with fear that he would reject her, fear that he would see her as a burden now. But Ethan reached out and gently held her hand, telling her with soft determination that he didn't care if she was a princess or a stranger. or the last of her kind. All he cared about was keeping her alive, keeping her safe, keeping her away from those who wanted to hurt her. She stared at his hand holding hers, her fingers trembling as if unsure how to respond. Then slowly, cautiously, she curled her hand around his, a silent acceptance, a fragile trust blooming between them in the shadow of a dying outpost. Outside the walls came a distant pounding, the sound of tribal drums starting again, their rhythm vibrating through the ground like a warning that the hunt had not ended, that the danger was only beginning. Liara's breath hitched and she whispered a word that sounded like fear wrapped in ancient memory. Ethan squeezed her hand tighter and whispered back that he wouldn't let them take her. Not now, not ever. The lights flickered once more, casting long shadows that seemed to lean toward the door as if listening. Ethan lifted his rifle with his free hand, positioning himself between Liara and the sound of approaching danger. And in that dim, trembling outpost, a human soldier and an alien princess waited together, their fates weaving slowly into one path, one story, one destiny that neither of them yet understood, but both could feel rising like a silent storm in the night. The outpost trembled with a deep rhythmic vibration, a pulse so heavy it felt like the ground itself was warning them that the tribe was drawing closer. Ethan's breath grew tight as he listened, every instinct screaming that they had only minutes before the warriors reached the abandoned structure. Liara sat on the cot wrapped in the thermal blanket, her silver skin glowing faintly in the flickering light, her eyes wide with fear she was trying hard to hide. And Ethan felt something twist inside him because she looked like someone who had already lost too much and was terrified of losing more. He knelt beside her and told her softly that they needed to move, his voice steady even though his heartbeat was racing. She nodded weakly, trying to rise, but her legs trembled under her weight. Ethan caught her instantly, one arm supporting her back, the other gently holding her hand. She whispered something in her language, a word filled with apology and frustration at her own weakness, and he shook his head, telling her she had nothing to be sorry for. The pounding outside grew louder, more organized, the steady beat of ritual drums merging with war cries that echoed through the glowing trees. Liara's eyes shone with fear as she looked toward the door, and Ethan felt a wave of anger sweep through him, anger that she had been hunted, tortured, and forced to run until she could barely breathe. He helped her stand, wrapping her arm around his shoulder, guiding her toward the rear exit, each step slow and careful, her faint glow brushing against his skin like pale starlight. But before they reached the metal doorway, the outpost shook violently as something massive struck the front wall. The lights flickered, casting shadows that danced like restless spirits. Liara gasped, clutching Ethan's arm, and he whispered that they were getting out now, not waiting another second. He led her through a narrow hall to a rusted hatch at the back of the outpost, kicking it open with one sharp strike. Cool night air rushed in, carrying the distant scent of river water and damp glowing leaves. He guided her outside, hiding her behind a fallen trunk while he scanned the forest, his eyes catching faint movement among the trees. The tribe had circled the outpost, torches glowing like angry stars between the trunks. Ethan cursed under his breath, realizing escape on foot would be almost impossible. The warriors moved with frightening speed, their silhouettes large and wild, their bone armor reflecting the firelight with red and gold cracks. Liara watched them with trembling breaths, her hand pressed against her chest where an ancient symbol glowed faintly beneath her skin. Ethan turned to her, asking in a soft voice if she could walk a little farther. She swallowed hard and nodded, though he could see the pain flickering beneath her expression. He slipped his arm around her again, leading her deeper into the shadows behind the outpost, moving as quietly as he could, but the tribe's chanting grew louder, echoing through the forest like a warning of the storm closing in on them. A sudden roar split the night, a sound so powerful it shook leaves from the branches above them. Ethan pulled Liara close, hiding behind the roots of a massive luminous tree as the tribal chief stepped into view, his towering frame covered in crimson markings, his tusks carved with symbols of rank, his eyes burning yellow as he raised a spear tipped with glowing crystal. He shouted commands into the night, and the tribe fanned out like a tightening net. Liara whispered something urgently, pointing weakly toward the ground where a cluster of smooth stones lay half buried under moss. Ethan followed her pointing finger and saw strange symbols etched into them, similar to the ancient design he had seen earlier glowing beneath her skin. It wasn't random. It was a sign, a path. He brushed aside the moss and found the edge of a stone door hidden beneath dirt and glowing vines, a secret entrance to something older than the jungle itself. Liara's breathing quickened as she reached out with trembling fingers, touching the symbol carved into the stone. The moment her skin met the ancient mark, the stones shifted with a low groan, sliding open to reveal a dark tunnel leading underground. Her body swayed as the door opened, her strength draining from the effort. Ethan caught her again, lifting her gently into his arms, his heart pounding with urgency. He stepped into the tunnel just as a group of warriors ran past the tree above them, their torches casting wild shadows across the clearing, their footsteps heavy and angry, unaware of the hidden path right beneath their feet. Inside the tunnel, the air was cool and still, illuminated by faint lines of ancient light running across the stone walls. Like veins of a sleeping creature, Ethan walked through the passage, his breathing loud in the silence, Liara resting against him, whispering words he didn't understand but could feel, words filled with fear, memory, and something ancient calling her home. The ground rumbled above them as the tribe searched the surface, their roars muffled now but no less terrifying. Ethan followed the glowing path of symbols deeper into the earth, his footsteps steady despite the weight of danger pressing close around them. Liara opened her eyes for a moment, looking up at him with a fragile trust that made his chest ache. She whispered his name, not perfectly, but close enough that he felt the sound settle into the center of his soul. And he told her softly that he would not let the tribe touch her again. He would protect her even if it meant standing against the entire jungle alone. Their path opened into a massive underground chamber lined with ancient stone pillars, each one etched with symbols that glowed brighter as Liara drew near. Ethan felt something shift in the air, a hum of power awakening, a secret buried for centuries responding to the presence of its lost princess. Far above them, the tribal drums thundered like a sky ready to break open. But down here, in the heart of forgotten history, a new story was beginning to breathe, one that neither Ethan nor Liara understood yet, but both could feel rising around them like fate weaving its first threads through the darkness. The chamber welcomed them with a soft trembling glow, as if the walls themselves had been waiting centuries for someone to return. Ethan carried Liara deeper inside, her silver skin dimming with every weakening breath, his arms tightening around her instinctively as if holding her closer could stop the life from slipping out of her. The silence around them felt ancient and heavy, broken only by the soft pulses of light that traveled along the stone pillars like slow heartbeats. He laid her gently on the smooth floor near the largest pillar, its surface etched with swirling symbols that responded instantly to her presence, brightening like a rising dawn. Liara's eyes fluttered open, their violet color softer now, dimmer, as she whispered something that sounded like an apology mixed with fear. Ethan shook his head quickly, brushing a strand of her glowing hair away from her face, telling her that she had nothing to be sorry for. Not now, not ever. Her breath shivered as she took in the chamber, her gaze full of both recognition and pain. The walls came alive as she looked around, ancient imagery forming from shimmering dust, holograms awakening after centuries of sleep. Ethan watched in silence as the chamber projected scenes from a long-lost world, graceful towers rising beneath alien skies, fleets of shimmering starships gliding across cosmic storms, beings like Liara walking among oceans of light, their bodies glowing like living constellations. Then the imagery shifted, showing war, darkness, collapse, entire cities burning under the assault of unknown forces, the empire dying in a storm of shattered stars. Liara flinched at the sight, pressing her hand to her heart as if the memories hurt her physically. Ethan knelt beside her, placing his hand gently over hers, grounding her in the present. She whispered her people's name, her voice breaking. Aloria, the lost empire that had vanished before humans learned to walk in space. The same empire that now flickered in ghostly images around them. Ethan realized the chamber wasn't just a temple or a ruin. It was a memory vault, a place built to preserve their story in case one last royal survived. The glowing pillar beside Liara responded to her heartbeat, brightening each time she inhaled, dimming each time she exhaled weakly. Ethan could feel the urgency rising inside him. She was fading, slipping away piece by piece. He asked gently what she needed, how he could help. She looked at him with trembling eyes and pointed toward the pillar, whispering a single word he didn't know but somehow understood. Connection. The chamber was reacting to her bloodline, but she was too weak to utilize it fully. Too injured, too drained from the torture. Ethan took her hand and pressed it against the pillar, hoping it would help her, hoping anything would help her. The pillar brightened instantly, sending a wave of light spreading across the chamber, the air vibrating with a deep soft hum, ancient machinery waking like a long-dormant giant. Liara gasped as warmth spread through her fingertips, flowing up her arm like a gentle current of energy. Ethan held her steady as she trembled, her eyes widening at the sensation. The chamber was healing her, giving her strength she had lost. But it was taking something as well. The room dimmed around them, the symbols trembling as if straining under the effort of restoring her. Ethan tightened his grip on her hand, whispering softly for her to stay awake, stay with him, not to drift away. She blinked slowly, her breathing deepening as the energy flowed through her body, color returning faintly to her silver skin, her glow strengthening little by little. But just as her strength began to rise, the chamber shook violently, dust falling from the ceiling. Ethan immediately shielded her with his body, the hum of the pillars shifting from gentle to urgent. Liara looked toward the tunnel they had come through, her eyes filling with dread. The tribe had found the entrance. The pounding of their war drums echoed faintly down the stone passage. Ethan cursed under his breath. He knew they had only moments before the warriors stormed the chamber. He lifted Liara again, but she gripped his arm tightly, shaking her head weakly, pointing toward the center of the room where the hologram now showed something new. A map of the planet appeared, swirling like a floating starfield. At its center was a glowing core marked with the same symbol as the one on Liara's chest, a symbol pulsing with dangerous power. Liara whispered haltingly, explaining in broken fragments of her language and gestures that her bloodline was tied to the planet's ancient heart, a weapon forged by her ancestors to protect the Empire, but capable of devastating entire worlds if awakened by violence or fear. The tribe wanted her for that very reason. Ethan's blood ran cold as the realization settled into him. They weren't hunting her for sacrifice or ritual. They were trying to control an ancient power through her. She wasn't just a princess. She was a living key to something catastrophic, something that could reshape the balance of every world nearby. Liara's voice trembled as she whispered Ethan's name, asking with her eyes whether he understood now why she feared herself, why she feared what might awaken if she fell into the wrong hands. Ethan cupped her face gently, his voice soft but fierce as he told her that she wasn't a weapon. She was someone worth saving, someone whose life meant more than the power inside her. Her breath hitched at his words, tears gathering in her glowing eyes. The chamber trembled again, the sound of the tribe's heavy footsteps echoing down the tunnel. Closer now, louder. The pillars flickered, reacting to the rising threat. Liara looked toward Ethan, fear and trust colliding inside her eyes, and Ethan pulled her into his arms once more, ready to face whatever waited at the entrance, ready to fight the storm coming toward them. Above them ancient lights pulsed brighter, as if the heart of Eloria were watching, waiting, holding its breath for what came next. And deep in the earth, the world felt poised on the edge of awakening, with Ethan and Liara standing at the center of a destiny neither had chosen, but both were bound to face together. The first crash of a spear against the stone entrance echoed through the chamber like thunder waking an ancient beast. Ethan felt the vibration run up his spine as he shifted Liara behind him, placing himself between her and the dark tunnel where torchlight flickered like hungry flames. Liara's breath trembled as she pressed a hand to the glowing pillar beside her, trying to draw the last drops of strength from the ancient energy, still pulsing weakly through the room. But the chamber itself seemed afraid, its lights flickering like fading stars as the tribe's war cries grew louder. Ethan raised his rifle, his hands tight with fear and determination tangled together. The air felt sharp, cold, and heavy with the weight of what was coming, and for a moment he wondered if he was standing in the last safe place they would ever have. Liara reached toward him with trembling fingers, whispering something in her language that he didn't fully understand, but the plea in her voice was clear. She didn't want him to face this alone. He gave her a soft smile, one that tried to hide the fear in his chest, telling her quietly that she wasn't alone, not anymore. The stone doorway shattered inward as the tribal chief forced his way through, his crimson markings glowing brighter in the chamber's light, his massive frame filling the entrance like a living wall of fury. Behind him dozens of warriors poured into the room, their bone armor clattering, their chants rising in a violent rhythm that shook dust from the ceiling. Liara gasped and stumbled, clutching Ethan's sleeve as ancient fear rippled through her. Ethan stepped forward, lifting his rifle and firing a controlled burst into the ground at the warrior's feet. The crack of the shots echoing through the chamber like lightning tearing open the sky. Some warriors flinched, but the chief didn't slow. He leveled his spear, its crystal tip glowing with a dangerous red light that made the air hiss. Ethan braced himself and shouted at them to stop, but the chief only roared louder and charged. The impact was brutal as their weapons clashed. Ethan barely dodged the first strike, the spear slicing through the air where his head had been a heartbeat before. He fired again, forcing the chief back with a burst of sparks, but the warriors swarmed around them, circling like predators around their wounded prey. Ethan fought with desperate strength, punching, dodging, striking with every ounce of training he had. But there were too many, far too many. Liara pressed her hand against the pillar, her eyes glowing brighter as she tried to summon more energy. But the chamber groaned under the strain, cracks forming in the stone floor as ancient power surged unevenly. Her breath shook violently, her body caught between strength and collapse. Ethan saw her falter and tried to reach her, but the chief caught him with the blunt end of the spear, sending him crashing to the ground. Pain exploded through his ribs as he rolled onto his back. Gasping for air, the chief lifted the glowing spear to strike again. Ethan scrambled up despite the pain, raising his rifle with shaking hands. But before the chief could strike, Liara cried out his name in a voice filled with terror and fury, energy bursting from her palms in a wave of violet light. The blast hit the chief directly, throwing him backward into the stone pillar with a violent crash. The chamber responded instantly, symbols across the walls lighting up as if awakened by her scream. The warriors staggered as a shockwave rippled through the floor. Ethan stared in awe as Liara stood glowing like a dying star refusing to fade, her silver skin illuminated with swirling veins of bright violet energy, her eyes burning with ancestral power she barely knew how to control. But the effort broke her. She collapsed to her knees, gasping as the last of her strength poured out of her like water through cracked glass. Ethan rushed to her, sliding an arm around her shoulders as she trembled violently. He whispered desperately for her to stop, to save her strength, but she shook her head, pointing toward the chief who was already rising again, angrier than before. The ground cracked beneath the chief's feet as he roared, raising his spear for a final strike. Ethan threw himself between Liara and the incoming blow. The spear slammed against him like a meteor falling from the sky, pain shooting through his body like fire. He hit the ground hard, breath ripped from his lungs, vision blurring at the edges. Liara screamed his name, her voice breaking in a way that tore through the chamber with more force than any weapon. She crawled to him, her glowing hands shaking as she tried to pull him up, her tears falling onto his cheek like drops of liquid starlight. Ethan forced his eyes open, forcing a smile through the pain, telling her weakly that he wasn't going anywhere, that she was safe, even though he knew he couldn't stand, couldn't fight, not anymore. The chamber reacted to her grief, lights rising into a swirling storm around them, ancient holograms flickering awake as if the entire place was mourning with her. The chief raised his spear again, but before he could strike, the ground beneath him cracked open with a deafening roar, a burst of violet light shooting upward as the ancient heart of the planet awakened. Liara's energy spiraled into the air as if pulled by invisible hands, her tears glowing brighter, her voice trembling with power and sorrow. Ethan felt the air tremble around him, the chamber shifting as if preparing for something monumental. The warriors stumbled back in fear, the chief shielding his eyes from the rising storm of light, and Liara pressed her forehead against Ethan's, her voice a soft broken whisper promising she wouldn't let him die. She wouldn't let this world take him from her. The chamber pulsed with ancient power responding to her vow, the air thick with destiny, danger, and the fragile thread of hope binding their hearts together. As the ground shook beneath them and the light swallowed the room, preparing to change everything that came next, the chamber exploded in a storm of violet light that rose like a living wave, swirling around Ethan and Liara with a force that made the air feel thick and trembling. Ethan felt weightless for a moment, suspended between pain and darkness, as if the world beneath him had vanished, the roar of the awakened planet echoing like a heartbeat too large for the earth to contain. Liara's glowing hands pressed against his chest, her tears drifting upward like shining droplets caught in the rising energy, and in that breathless moment it felt as if time itself had paused to watch them. The tribal warriors stumbled back in fear, shielding their eyes as the chamber flooded with blinding light. The chief roared, trying to push forward, but the ancient power flooding the room forced him to his knees. Cracks of violet lightning danced across the stone floor, racing toward the center where Ethan lay with Liara curled protectively over him, her body glowing brighter with every trembling breath. Ethan tried to speak, but his voice was barely a whisper. She leaned closer, her forehead touching his, her breath warm against his skin. She whispered his name with a softness that held 1,000 emotions: fear, gratitude, hope, something deeper she didn't yet know how to express. He forced a weak smile, telling her he was still here, that she wasn't going to lose him. Even though the pain in his ribs made every word feel like fire, the ancient heart of the planet pulsed beneath them, a deep thunder rolling through the chamber as if something buried for centuries was finally awakening. The holographic guardian appeared again, rising from the swirling light, its form tall and graceful, its voice resonating like distant echoes of forgotten stars. It looked at Liara and then at Ethan, its tone filled with awe as it declared that the last royal and the chosen protector had been united. Liara trembled as she listened, her glowing eyes widening at the words. The Guardian spoke of destiny not shaped by empires or bloodlines but by choice. The choice Ethan made when he followed a scream into a deadly forest. The choice she made when she trusted him despite centuries of fear between their species. Their bond had awakened something ancient that had been waiting for a connection of heart, rather than power. The Guardian raised its hand and the violet storm calmed, the light curling gently around Ethan's body like warm mist. His pain slowly easing as the ancient energy seeped into him, not harming him but healing him. Recognizing his sacrifice, Liara gasped softly as she felt his heartbeat grow steadier beneath her palms, a tear slipping down her cheek in relief. Ethan lifted a trembling hand and brushed the tear away, telling her that he wasn't leaving her. Not now, not ever. The chief tried to rise again, bellowing orders to his warriors, but the Guardian turned its gaze toward him, the ground shaking beneath the tribe as if the planet itself rejected their violent intentions. The warriors scattered, stumbling back toward the tunnel in terror. The chief snarled and raised his spear again, but before he could charge, a wave of purple light erupted from the chamber floor, knocking him backward with a force that sent him crashing against the stone pillars. Liara leaned against Ethan, her body trembling from exhaustion, but a faint peace softened her expression now. The Guardian spoke again, its voice quieter, almost gentle, telling her that the weapon her ancestors created no longer needed to exist, that her bond with the human soldier had rewritten the ancient protocol. This power was no longer tied to destruction but to unity. It would no longer answer fear or bloodshed, only connection. The chamber lights dimmed softly, as if sighing with relief, the cracks in the floor ceiling, the ancient power folding itself into a slumber that no violence could wake again. Liara looked Ethan with a mixture of wonder and confusion, as if trying to understand how the universe had shifted beneath her feet because of a single human who refused to turn away from her suffering. Ethan touched her cheek gently, telling her that she didn't have to fear herself anymore. Footsteps echoed from the tunnel entrance, but this time they were human, not tribal. Soldiers in armored suits rushed into the chamber, their helmets casting beams of white light across the ancient walls. Ethan's radio crackled weakly at his side, voices calling his name in frantic tones. Liara tensed in fear, but Ethan squeezed her hand and whispered that they were allies, that she was safe. The soldiers froze when they saw her, their weapons lowering slowly as they took in her glowing silver skin and violet eyes. No one had ever seen an Aelorian princess alive. No one believed their empire still had a living heir. The commanding officer approached cautiously, asking Ethan what had happened. Ethan didn't look away from Liara as he said softly that she wasn't a threat. She was under his protection, and she needed medical care immediately. Liara looked uncertain, her fingers tightening around Ethan's hand as if afraid they would separate her from him. Ethan leaned close and whispered that he wasn't letting her go. Not now, not after everything. Her eyes softened, glowing with a quiet emotion she didn't know how to name yet. As the soldiers helped them toward the exit, Liara refused to release his hand, clinging to him as the chamber faded behind them, its lights dimming once more into ancient sleep. Ethan felt her head rest gently against his shoulder, her breath warm and steady, her voice a soft whisper thanking him, not just for saving her life, but for seeing her as more than a weapon or a legend. When they stepped out into the moonlit jungle, the world felt different, not because the danger had passed, but because something new had begun. A bond that crossed galaxies, a story that defied history, a connection that would reshape everything that came after. And as they walked together, her hand in his, the night seemed quieter, the air calmer, as if both their worlds were holding their breath in wonder at the moment a human soldier and an alien princess changed the fate of two civilizations forever.